Late last month, a Korean Netflix original, Juvenile Justice, caught quite a bit of global attention and has since reignited debate over the issue of youth crime and criminal liability here in the country. For more, I have visiting Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University. Professor An, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Cho Hee-kyung at Hongik University joining this particular session virtually. Welcome back, Professor Cho.
Thank you for having me.
Professor An, we'll start here then. Let's begin with some background information with regard to the standard judicial response to juvenile delinquency here in the country.
Yeah, I mean, before we discuss the issue from a legal perspective, we need to start with the legal definitions first. The juvenile, under the Korean Juvenile Act, the juvenile is defined to be a person under the age of 19, right? So what happened was, and then for this, make sure that some people got confused because Korean society have a Korean aging, right? Which is different from the Korean one. But there's a legal age, so it's very important in terms of a legal perspective. And the court actually checking like 11 months and 11 years and 13 months, 10 months, something like that, calculation. So you have to be very specific the months, right? Also, there's one, the juvenile, right? Okay, there's also a definition for juvenile protection case, which is applied to age between 14 and 18. So that's the more like the government given protection for the age of certain age juveniles, right? And that's the one we talk today, ages 14 to 18, right?
Right. And Professor Cho, under Korea's legal framework, how are first-time youth offenders disciplined?
So if you are a juvenile, i.e. under the age of 19, you are technically not liable for any crimes that you commit under the criminal code. And obviously that is not a desirable state of affairs. So they enacted this Juvenile Act in order to be able to deal with juvenile offenders. So children who are too young to be tried as an adult, but who should still be held responsible in some way for their actions. And so under the Juvenile Act, those under 10 years of age are still not being held responsible. But if you're above 10 years, between 10 and 14, you can be subjected to what's known as protective orders. And there are, in the law, 10 different protective orders provided for that the judge can order with respect to the juvenile offender who's before the court. And it ranges, the protective orders range from releasing the juvenile into the custody of a guardian. It can be a parent or some other person who can actually act as a parent, to giving them, courses on how to perhaps manage their anger, or even making them do volunteer service if you are above a certain age. I think you have to be at least 14 to be able to do this, up to the most stringent order, which is to actually incarcerate that juvenile in a juvenile detention center for up to 2 years. And so there are various protective orders that a judge can make against the juvenile.
Right. Now, Professor An, it appears that the number of crimes committed by first-time child offenders is on the rise, as is the rate of recidivism. Could you tell us more about this reality?
Yes, well, actually, I've been doing a little bit research on it, on the issue, but actually the data I'm receiving, there's a little some differences actually, so I will very carefully comment on this. According to the Ministry of Justice data, there's about 9,000 juvenile cases in 2020. There's reported cases, and for the past 5 years, interesting, and then over 60% of the juvenile crime was committed the person at the age of 13. So more than half of the juvenile crime was committed when they were age 13, right? So, and also there's repeat offense rate is about 12.5%, which is about 3 times higher than that of adults. So it's a much higher repeat offense rate, and that's going to be concerning. But however, that's not only a legal perspective, but the repeat offense cases is a more societal issue. Maybe the systemic failure, how we teach them, how we give them a second chance, the systemic failure, possibly also legal perspective. I think from the legal perspective, might be an easy solution actually, and from my opinion, because that there's like an enhanced sentence system, just like in California. There's like three-strike rules, means that you have a lenient sentence for the first offense, and second offense fine, but third time we will really heavy, the penalties imposed. Well, if we have this current juvenile system, if we have the only one time, first time offender maybe only got protected classes, only cases only, or if a second offense, maybe you can just get it as the adult, taken as adult. If they know that if I do commit twice, there will be no mercy on them, as if they're juniors, right? I mean, juvenile, right? Then maybe sending some message, very clear message, and kind of deter their more further crimes, I think.
Right. Professor Cho, debate over the minimum age now for delinquency jurisdiction is nothing new. Having said that, what appear to be the issues of contention here in the country then?
So as you say, there is a perception that juvenile crime is on the rise, and people believe that juveniles, knowing that they won't be punished or they won't have any criminal liability on the Juvenile Act, deliberately go out and commit offenses, and there is no practical way to hold them liable either under juvenile law or under criminal code. And that has been suggested as the biggest issue. But I would approach the statistics that we are receiving with some skepticism, because if you actually look at the real numbers, you can't really say that there is a trend that it's on the rise. Some years the numbers actually dip. Some years it does go up. In the last couple of years, there was a sudden increase in the more serious crimes committed by juveniles, but we have to question whether it's a case of more cases being reported or whether there are actually more crimes being committed. And second thing that we know about based on data is that serious crimes such as violent crimes such as robbery or grievous bodily harm, those kind of crimes are actually on the decrease amongst juveniles, whereas sexual offenses are on the increase. And that, I think, is a lot to do with the fact that teenagers and young people are much more exposed to sexual material online, and those are the kind of things that we need to delve into more deeply. The question of age is an age-old question, I can say. Even in the Roman days, they actually struggled with this, and they had a much more kind of very graduated response. They used to classify juveniles into 7 to 12, and then 12 to 19, and 19 to 25. And they said between 7 to 12, we have to question whether the child is actually aware of what they have done is wrong or right. And between 12 and so on and so forth. And so I don't think it's a case of just simply setting an age limit or a standard in age and saying, okay, we are going to punish everybody under the age of 12, because we are not actually addressing the root causes. And what are you going to do if you lower the age to 13 and then 12 and then 11-year-olds commit the crime and 10-year-olds and so forth? What are you going to do about that? And at the same time, if we are going to hold them up to the same kind of legal responsibility for offenses that they commit, then we should be giving them same kind of legal rights that they should enjoy. So if they are able to be held criminally liable for their actions, then they should also have the same kind of rights under the law. But we are not actually talking about that. So I would question simply lowering age of juvenile offenders.
Right. And moving beyond national borders, for the sake of comparison, Professor An, what can you tell us about the minimum age for delinquency jurisdiction in other countries?
Yeah, actually, interesting question. People talk about it, right? But the Korean Juvenile Act was enacted in 1953. 7 years ago, right? And 2003, the Korean Constitutional Court ruled that the criminal minor age of under 14, it was constitutional because they deemed that it is not excessively low compared to other countries. Let's talk about other countries like UK, the 10 year, and then the Canada is 12, and US is very by state, but between 7 to 14. But China was about 16, interesting. But however, in China, I think that doing my research, and the age of 14 and 15, they have a criminal prosecution. So just like others, right? So the question is that why? So interesting about UK perspective, I read news about UK side, and then they're so low compared to other countries. They're kind of the public debate whether they should increase the minimum age of criminal responsibility because 10 kind of is pretty young. So I think in this moment, I think that we're talking about Korea, and we try to maybe decrease by 1 or 2 years younger, about age about 12. But still, once again, I agree with Professor Joe. Just simply lowering the minimum age of criminal responsibility does not solve all problems. Because there are a lot of things caused by systemic failure.
Right. Staying abroad, Professor Joe, what can you share with us about the different approaches to juvenile delinquency across the nations? I mean, some nations have chosen to adopt a more therapeutic intervention philosophy, claiming that it reduces repeated crimes, while other countries have taken more punitive actions. Could you tell us more?
You're right. So most countries that do have juvenile justice system, not all countries do tend to have a range of orders that a judge can make with regard to the juvenile, similar to ours, from protective custodial orders to incarceration in detention centers. But what other countries do that are much more effective, that are not available in our country, is what you just mentioned, which is therapeutic treatment of the juvenile. Now, in terms of preventing juvenile crimes or crimes in general, we can talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention methods. And primary prevention is all about internalization of values, the right kind of values. You know what you are doing is right and wrong. You know what harm you might be doing to other people. And that kind of primary prevention is really done through education and having a social relationship with other people. And so the role of family and schools are really important. And very often in juvenile offenders cases, they come from, I can only generalize here, but in most cases, they do have problematic background. They may suffer abuse from their own custodians. They may come from broken homes. They may be bullied at home, at school. So they may, and in a lot of cases, they also suffer from poverty. And so those kind of contributing factors, unless they are actually addressed at a root level, it's not going to help prevent the juvenile from committing recidivism and engaging in other offenses. The secondary prevention method is actually taking physical and mechanical means to prevent crimes from occurring. That could range from, having better lighting in an area or more police patrol, all sorts of those kind of things. And criminal justice system is only the third level of prevention or even prevention. And it's the least effective method of prevention because by the time criminal system gets involved, it's way too late. Too late for the victims, too late for the offender to actually reconsider, too late for the society generally, particularly for juveniles. And another thing that we know about juvenile offenders is that teenagers, juveniles, their brain is different from an adult brain. Their brain is very volatile. A juvenile offender will know what they're doing is right or wrong. They know the wrongness of their conduct, but what they can't do is actually have sufficient self-control over their own conduct and have the insight about what kind of effect what they're doing is going to have on the rest of their lives. And so they're much more susceptible to peer pressure than adult offender is. And so this is why it's so critical for us to get in there early to help them and prevent them from committing crimes in the first place, rather than trying to, increase punishment and, giving them longer incarceration and lowering the minimum age, etc. That's just not going to help.
Right. But regardless of that, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol himself has also pledged, well, he pledged during his campaign rally that the minimum age for delinquency jurisdiction should be lowered to about 12. And the Justice Ministry here has acknowledged the need for this amendment. What are your thoughts, Professor An?
Yes, going back to the same question, it's simply lowering the minimum age does not solve the problem. The problem is that I think we need to get more preparation. For example, like I actually think about 7-year-old law, Juvenile Act, maybe time to amend. Yes, I agree with that. However, how to do it, that's really the things we have to discuss it. Think about there's only one juvenile prison in Korea at this moment. So, and there's overpopulated already. So think about the situation. Let's say you just increasing the lowering age, and then about the 60% of the juvenile case actually committed by the age of 13. So then quite a surge of the increase of the criminal number at the juvenile prison, right? And how we're going to handle it? You're going to build more prisons nationwide, right? That's not, it costs money and the time. Also, there was a female and male separate prison, we said 2 more perhaps. There's a lot of issues, and are we prepared for this? I mean, just simply talking about lowering it, yes, fine, you can lower it, but you have to be prepared when you're doing it, right? So I think that you have time to do it, and then the system also there's have to be system support, and to be that I think juvenile crime is not the personal crime; it's more like a societal problem issue, because that the society in part caused the crime because that the juvenile the kid minors didn't have a chance, had a good education, didn't have good resources and bad family, and got a family something bad history. So it's helped to setting up more comprehensive plan is more important, and then try to get ready for that. I think that's the issue. We have to take comprehensive approach.
Right. And keeping what you said in mind then, Professor An, I'm going to ask you a rather difficult question. What issues then need to be addressed to allow for perhaps a constructive revision to the legal framework governing youth crime then?
Actually, when I reviewed the Juvenile Act this morning, I was very surprised that, for example, there's no right to attorney for the juvenile. It's very interesting, and because it's in a way they have a special law, and you have option to, hire a lawyer, but it's not mandatory, just like not a criminal case. So I think there are a lot of things you have to, amend it from the legal perspective, and then also, but I think there's a big difference. Even if you're lowering let's say lowering by 1 or 2 years, we want to change it. Is it going to deter the criminal rate? I disagree actually. Maybe a little bit lower, but you will produce much more juvenile criminal society, and then would it be better as a society, as a big picture? Is it better producing more juvenile criminals who will be going back to to society? That's the issue. Also a lot of, and then I think that's the one we think about systemic big picture. I think approach is necessary.
Professor Jo, based on what you've said so far, it appears that focusing perhaps on the causes of child crime would be a better alternative to simply seeking punitive actions against youth offenders. Having said that, what do you say, or how do you respond then to the prevalence, like you mentioned earlier on, of these heinous crimes perpetrated by first-time offenders, as opposed to the petty ones that we normally associate with children?
You're right. Yes, indeed. You mentioned that Netflix, so the series Juvenile Justice on this OTT platform, which kind of got us started, but that was actually inspired by a real life crime that was committed by a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. Now, the offenders in that case were not subject to juvenile law, Juvenile Act, but the crime that they committed was so heinous that it couldn't actually be described in the media. Also, similarly, in the UK, we have the Jamie Bulger case, which happened decades ago, but that's one of the reasons why UK would never be able to raise the minimum age for criminal liability for juveniles from above 10, because it was a case committed by two 10-year-olds with a 5-year-old, victim. Why is it that those kind of heinous crimes are on the rise? I don't know if it is, but we are certainly hearing more about it. In that Incheon case involving the two 17 to the 17-year-old or 19-year-old, they talked about how they were sort of in this kind of online community that sort of allowed the manifestation and kind of gathering together of very violent kind of fantasies that could, and it, by allowing like-minded people to get together, they were able to sort of have this kind of motivation to actually carry it out. And something like that should be sort of looked at more closely. But I just wanted to also comment on, what could be done in our society. And Professor An mentioned how juveniles don't actually have a right to an attorney in a juvenile case. But the point is, there is no prosecutor in those hearings. And so the judge is supposed to act in the best interest of the juvenile offender in those cases. But in so many of those cases, the judges often only have maybe 5 minutes for a group of juveniles. There is a very famous judge who has been working on the juvenile court for nearly a decade. And you can see, he's sort of the videos of how he hears cases. And there is a group of, maybe 6 or 7 juvenile offenders in front of him. And he is yelling at them. And he explains later why he's yelling at them, because he says he doesn't have enough time to actually talk to them, really sort of talk to them, connect with them on a personal level, try to really talk some sense into them, etc. And so just actually, augmenting the numbers of judges who are responsible for juvenile cases and, valuing their work better would make a real difference in the very short term. We could just begin with that, for example.
Right, that is a point that we can take into consideration. Of course, Professor An, finally, and very briefly speaking, what efforts perhaps then are needed within political circles to address this issue of youth crime here in the country?
Well, I think that we need to really see the big picture situation, because just once again, simply lowering the minimum age doesn't solve the whole problem. And what will happen? We think about what cause and effect situation, what kind of things, chain effect will happens. We have to build more, juvenile prison, and then more like reformatory system, reform and put more money on it, and hire more people to handle the situation and to prevent more societal things. And then lastly, I'd like to brief comment is that you have to look at the actual act. Act. It's about something very serious crime, just murder or arson. Maybe you should try as the adult, right? That doesn't matter how you. I should say, at least if you're 14, something you should get, treated like adult. If you do it, so U.S. system is like even though it's a minimum age, if you go above the responsibility level, minimum age, and then they see whether you by conduct is adult conduct, doesn't matter you're 14 or 15, but the situation. So if you commit a murder, even if you're 14 or 15, you should be tried as like adult, because the way the system they see it.
Right, so you need to have a balance between punishment and reform.
Yeah, separate the act and the age, right?
All right, Professor An, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Zhou, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.